Are we getting started?
Why don't you? We're at 7:02, so why don't you go
All
ahead and
right,
get started?
sounds good. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our virtual discussion on the digital divide. It's wonderful to see everyone here this evening. At this time, I ask all attendees to mute themselves. If any questions arise throughout the presentation, please drop the questions in the chat, and we will respond to them during the Q&A. To center us for the conversation, I want to bring up a few points. As we know, the digital divide is the unequal access and distribution of technology, internet, and the knowledge of technological devices. This disparity among groups can lead to a large variety of consequences, such as obstacles in educational institutions, as well as difficulties in staying updated on COVID safety guidelines. In a world where we have increasingly become dependent on electronic devices, it has never been more essential to ensure that every person has the proper knowledge and access to take full advantage of technology. Here today, I am lucky to mention that we have a wonderful panel with three distinguished speakers, Kyvaughn Henry, Susan Bender, and Rachel Barnhart. In that order, please feel free to introduce yourself by telling everyone your name, occupation, areas of expertise, and why you are interested in the digital divide.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Kyvaughn Henry. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And I am currently the director of grants for the David T. Kern Center at the University of Rochester, where I manage 5 federally funded TRIO programs. And if you're not familiar with TRIO, ultimately it is a cluster of college access programs that help predominantly low income, first generation students with disabilities, underrepresented minorities, hard to reach populations, help them persist through the educational pipeline. So we work with students as young as the 5th grade all the way through the PhD. I'm also a board member for the Association for Equality and Excellence in Education, in which we are the regional association that guides all of the TRIO programs in New York and New Jersey. And then I'm also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, in which, if you are familiar with Shirley Chisholm, Dorothy Irene Height, these women that have championed a lot of education initiatives and political initiatives as it pertains to closing the gaps and the disparities in economics, health, education for people of color, particularly Black people. I'm happy to be here today. I think when we think about the digital divide, I only really began to take notice in March of 2020. Like many folks right now, when we saw how the pandemic kind of exposed the inequities that were already present. And I feel like I am a minimalist, and my friends used to laugh at me. I did not have Wi-Fi in my home because all of my devices had data plans. And so if I needed to engage with the world in that way, I could go to work, right? Like I had the means. And when I found out that I wasn't going to be able to leave my home and go to those places, I leveraged my privilege. I called Spectrum and I got Wi-Fi so that my youngest sister could still be a student at MCC. My partner could work from home and I could work from home. But I recognized that not everybody had that privilege. And now that schools were being closed and libraries weren't being opened, and the McDonald's, if you walked down the block to get a little Wi-Fi there, you couldn't do that anymore. And so that made me take notice, right? The students that I serve in the city school districts, how are they going to be able to continue to access the world in that way? And we can't do it all on our phones, right? So that's why I'm here. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Good evening, everyone. I am Susan Bender. I also go by Susan Perlberg. And I teach at Monroe Community College. Specifically, I teach on the downtown campus. And prior to the new downtown campus, I was on the Damon City campus. And I've been teaching for a little shy of 22 years. I started when I was 10 years old. I'm also on the Mentors in Violence Prevention leadership team at the college, where I teach bystander intervention strategies, it's Dr. Jackson Katz's curriculum to community members, to students, and to the faculty at the college. I'm a nationally certified counselor and licensed mental health counselor. And so now what I teach at the college are these skills in the speech communication area in the visual and performing arts department. And specifically that's interpersonal communication, communication in crisis, where I work with students who are going to be first responders, police officers, teaching them communication skills and what happens to people in crisis situations. And I also teach small group communications as well, and have several dual enrollment courses in area high schools in the city of Rochester. So yeah, I've been aware of the digital divide for, all of my teaching years when I first really recognized that. But I have to say with the pandemic, it really exacerbated it. The gap just went like this. I saw my students who were in my face-to-face courses not be able to continue in their coursework, or even now, here it's a year later, and so the students who are registering and are going to classes, we are holding classes remotely. My students needing to turn off their cameras because they don't have the Wi-Fi capability because it's glitching. And so they have to turn off the cameras. And I teach interpersonal communication. I need to see your face. I need to be able to teach these skills and be watching them. And I can't hold my students, I can't hold them to that when it's not their fault that they don't have access to what they need. So that's why I'm really interested in this, and I'm happy to be here and share any of my thoughts as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Kyvaughn and Susan, for being here. My name is Susan Hughes-Smith, and I'm one of the co-hosts this evening. I'm running for the Monroe County Legislature this cycle for LD14, which is primarily Brighton, but with a sliver of Henrietta. I professionally have been teaching at SUNY Brockport and RIT for a number of years, and the digital divide came to me in a couple of different ways, but primarily through listening to students talk about their high school and how increasingly assignments were expected of them to be submitted online, that things were being posted online, and they didn't have reliable and internet access at home. And so how they'd be talking about sitting in parking lots of fast food establishments, trying to, 9, 10 o'clock at night to finish assignments. And this just seemed absurd to me. So when I began running for office, I was really pleased to see how much work Legislator Barnhart's already done on this issue, and how the county is moving forward those conversations. And I thought this is something we really need to highlight and move forward in a robust way. So thank you to Legislator Barnhart for leading the way and for joining us this evening to share your expertise.
Yes, thank you so much, Sue. And I really appreciate your support on this issue and your advocacy. And thank you to Kyvaughn and Susan as well for your comments. I first became very interested in the digital divide when I was a reporter. I remember it was probably the early 2010s. I visited Fairport High School. And I visited a class to do a story on how these students, who I think were sophomores or juniors, built their own social media network for their class. And they would do assignments together using this network and work at home on this network, share assignments, work collaboratively. And I thought to myself, well, this is really cool. It's a great story. But I don't really think that their peers everywhere can do this. And I started to really think about how the advantages that the students who had access to these tools had over students who didn't have access to those tools at home in particular. Not just in school, but I mean at home. The stuff they were doing at home, being able to explore and build, and just how crucial that was to experimentation and innovation and learning about the world and learning what your interests are. And then I discovered that Monroe County had this fiber network that was about 2015, 2016, and no one was using it. So that led into a study that was paid for by the city and the county. And so I was just really interested in this. And so when I got my MPA from Syracuse University, I wanted to study it. And our assignment for this assignment was we couldn't just study the problem. We really needed to look at this through a lens of public administration. How do you fix it? And so the presentation that I'm about to give you now should last about 15 minutes. We'll look at it through that lens. So we'll talk about the problem, but then we'll also talk about the solution and why coming up with a solution can be very challenging. So I'm really impressed with the group we have here. So let me share my screen. And let's see. Oh wait, I've got to get on the right screen here. Okay, this should work. Here we go. Here we go. Share. Now I just have to put in present mode. Okay. So when we talk about the problem of the digital divide, in rural areas, it tends to be a lack of access. The wires simply aren't built to reach all the houses in rural areas. In urban areas, the issue is more of a lack of adoption. People simply don't have subscription rates. And this information is from the census. And we found that households without internet in the city, there's about 27,000 households. It's nearly a third of households do not have an internet subscription. About 12% of households only have smartphone internet, which we know can be difficult. If you've ever tried to complete a school assignment or apply for a job on a smartphone, it's simply not adequate. Also, smartphones tend to have data caps, which is a huge, huge limitation as well. Nearly half of homes don't have any wired internet. So that's how you get, when you put the smartphone people in, and wired internet is the gold standard. Yes, my computer's on Wi-Fi right now, but but fiber internet is the backbone for my Wi-Fi network. And then 1 out of 5 households in the city don't have a computer. And if you look at the suburban rates, so when you include the city and the suburbs for the entire county, these still aren't great rates. I mean, there's still a significant number of households without internet. And Rochester is one of the worst connected in I'm so sorry here in the country. One of the worst connected cities in the country. So now we have to look at what are the root causes? Well, poverty is clearly a root cause. There's a direct correlation between internet adoption and household income, as you can see from these statistics. In households that make more than $75,000, very few don't have internet. But when you start to get down to the poverty line, nearly half don't have internet. And you can see when you compare maps of the poverty rate and the rate of internet, see how similar they look, with the darker areas being areas with high rates of not having internet. Another root cause is education. There's also a correlation between having the internet and having education. If you don't have a high school degree, you are less likely to have an internet subscription and to have a computer. If you have a college degree, far more likely to have the internet and to have a computer. So we also have to take a look at the marketplace. What's being offered? FCC defines broadband as 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. So here are our choices right now in Rochester. We have Spectrum Internet. Now, at the time I did this presentation, I think the prices are about the same. It's $65.99 a month for 100 megabits. That's really fast internet. They do have a discount program, but you do have to meet a lot of requirements. You have to have kids in school. They have to qualify for a free lunch. And the discount program is 30 megabits per second, which is totally fine to do schoolwork. It also costs money. It costs $14.99 a month. So we know that the subscription rates for the discount program are very, very low. And that could be for a number of reasons. It could be marketing. It could be that people don't have the $15 a month. And it could be that they owe another bill, a Spectrum bill from a previous account that they haven't paid. They would not qualify for this program. We also have Frontier. Frontier has been laying some fiber down, but most of their internet still is on their old copper phone networks. The DSL performance, we know, it can be very spotty. It's heavily dependent on location, and the speeds are lower, as you can see. It's less money, but you're not getting the same kind of product. Greenlight, and I know we have someone from Greenlight on this phone call. Everyone wants Greenlight because it's super, super fast internet, and it's a little cheaper than Spectrum at $50 a month. People are very pleased with this. One problem with Greenlight is it's not everywhere. Greenlight's business model is it really needs people to sign up before they're going to come into a neighborhood. And we'll talk a little bit more about ways that we might be able to solve that problem. And then, of course, a lot of people just have mobile internet. That's really slow internet. If you've ever used your phone as a hotspot, you know that it's not great. You're also paying a lot of money for your smartphone internet. You might be paying $70 to $90 a month. I think there are some cheaper plans, but they're not that much cheaper, particularly if you don't have data caps. And mobile plans do throttle heavy users to slower speeds. And we also mentioned smartphones. They're just not that great for heavy internet use. Another thing that we have to look at is our government infrastructure. Since the 1990s, Monroe County has built an extensive fiber internet that sits about 80% unused. This is what we call dark fiber. In 2016, 2017, the county and the city, they jointly studied, and we call it the Magellan study. That was the consultant that did the study. They jointly studied what do we do with this network? What are our assets? What are our internet assets in Monroe County? What does the city have? What does the county have? Well, the Magellan study, it's really long. It's very good. And I was the first one as part of my work here to see it. I mean, they literally did this study, paid a lot of money for it, and put it on a shelf. So we're now ready to dust it off and take it off the shelf now. The Magellan study had some recommendations. This fiber network that we built, it's not what we call carrier class. It's a lot of wires that are great if we can figure out how to connect them all together to make this huge network. And carrier class also means that the network has to be upgraded so that carriers can tap into that network. So right now, Greenlight, for example, could not tap into the county fiber network. It's not upgraded enough. It doesn't have all the technology that it needs so that we can connect a village hall or a town hall or a library or a house. So the county network, such as it is, it's wonderful that we laid all this fiber, but we didn't really do anything with it. We didn't unify it as a network that would allow other entities to jump on, potentially earning revenue for the county and saving money for partner governments. The study also recommended that the city and the county should just combine their fiber networks. The city leases fiber from Crown Castle. The county also leases some fiber, has its own network, and perhaps create this broadband improvement plan to figure out, like, how do we make our own network here? And what do we do with that network? And to answer the question of what do we do with it and how do we provide oversight of this combined joint network, and that would initially, perhaps only serve public institutions, they recommended creating sort of a public network entity, perhaps a nonprofit entity with representatives from government and private, we want to oversee this network and make sure that it's doing the right thing. And then once you upgrade it to carrier class and you do all these things and you create the infrastructure, you could possibly open it up for other uses, such as solving the digital divide. So when we look at how to solve this problem of, okay, what do we do, right? So let's just say, and I know Senator Schumer has a representative on this call, so let's just say the federal government gives us a lot of money and says, you can spend it however you want to solve the digital divide. Okay, what are you gonna do? I don't know, what are we gonna do? And what's our criteria for solving this problem? Well, we have to look at efficiency, right? It's efficient if it can provide a lot of internet to a lot of people at not a lot of cost. It's effective if it actually works. Are we increasing the number of people with broadband internet? Is it equitable? Are we providing internet to the greatest number of people in need? So, like, you could be effective and increase the number of people with internet, but it might not be reaching the people that we really need to reach and still leave a lot of people behind. That's not good. Is this administratively feasible? Is this something that the government can do or a private company can do? Can we actually implement this thing? And of course, Is it politically feasible? Is this going to have support from key stakeholders? Is it going to have support from voters? Is it going to have support from politicians? That's key to getting things done. So we're going to look at a couple of different models. First, a couple of different what we call policy alternatives. So what are some potential solutions here? Well, one is municipal broadband. Now, when we think of municipal broadband, we sometimes think, okay, it's a publicly owned network. It could be, but there's even that has several different models. You could have what we call full service retail. City or county owns the network, sells you the internet, runs the network, maintains the network. That's full service retail. You could have a public-private partnership, and that could take tons of different forms. You could have the county pay green light to go install internet out in the far reaches of the suburbs that don't have internet right now and say, we've got to share profits. We could have the county upgrade its network to carrier class, have a private company like Frontier run that network and have to abide by the terms of a contract. Public-private partnerships should be entered into with a great deal of care and thought, and you know, taking a look at who's assuming the risk, what happens if the company goes under, you know, what's the customer service going to be. There's a lot of pitfalls in public-private partnerships, but it's also, when it comes to issues of broadband, it could also open the door to some really exciting possibilities. And there are some around the country that really work. I mean, I've seen some contracts where the provider, the private provider, is mandated to answer the phone when customers call. So, I mean, you can really structure these things to protect the consumer, but you have to be very careful. And then the other thing that we have to look at too is when people hear municipal broadband, they automatically think, you know, fiber to the home. Maybe not. I mean, that is the gold standard, but perhaps a Wi-Fi network might be something better. Now, fiber is the backbone for a Wi-Fi network, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to connect every single house, and the technology is changing. One word of caution, this isn't in my presentation, but it's since come up. One word of caution, when you hear things like 5G and small cell technology, that still doesn't solve the digital divide. It's great technology that we might be able to incorporate into some of these solutions, but having the technology in and of itself might not solve the problem if we're not solving the cost issue for the people that we're trying to reach. I would also add, before I switch the slide, is one thing that the author of the Magellan study told me: don't let the technology dictate your solution. So keep an open mind. If you go in saying, I want fiber to the home, your project might fail because it might actually not be the best solution. Another alternative is work with existing service providers. So perhaps get Spectrum to offer better discounts. This is not an approach that has worked. We are doing some of this now. It doesn't really move the needle on adoption. You could also negotiate with internet service providers to provide free service. Perhaps my neighborhood, Beechwood, hey, come on in, provide free service to everyone with a Wi-Fi network. Well, that's a wonderful thing, but then what about the 19th ward? So you're starting to leave certain people behind. A patchwork solution may not be the best solution. And then we've got the status quo, which right now we're kind of just waiting for the private marketplace and some new technologies to bridge the digital divide. It's not happening. We're also heavily relying on philanthropy right now. I was part of an effort that raised funding through both the county, the city, and the community foundation and its partners to provide MiFi devices to city school students that don't have data caps. And that was vital during the pandemic. But one thing that we all realized was philanthropy is not a long-term solution. This is an expensive solution. It's not going to work forever. The status quo is the most politically feasible, at least for now, although I think that's changing because of the pandemic. So then as part of my project, I scored all the alternatives, and of course, municipal broadband came out on top. But, you know, municipal broadband, frankly, did maybe not as well on efficiency, but it did really well on effectiveness and equity. Administrative feasibility and political feasibility, it does not do well because it's very complicated and it's really difficult to get political support for something that might be a lot of money. Working with service providers could offer a potential path, but it may not be effective, it may not be equitable, and it frankly might not be the most efficient thing to do. And of course, the status quo is the one that's the most administratively feasible. You don't have to do anything. Government doesn't have to do anything. It's probably the most politically feasible because politicians don't have to be in the hot seat to make some difficult decisions about big projects that may or may not end up being successful. So now when you're talking about implementing solutions and picking which one you want, you have to map out who are the players here, and how much power do they have, and how much decision-making power do they have, and where are they on the interest chart. So one of the things that I found when I was talking to people is that the RCSD it has been and is now still a huge advocate for municipal broadband, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Anti-poverty organizations, huge. Businesses and the public also, are very interested in this solution, but they're kind of in the middle. They want to know, okay, what is in it for me? I don't know how I feel about this. I don't know if my tax dollars should go to something like this. Obviously, the governor, the mayor, the county executive have a ton of power here. I would also add the federal government too, because they are now providing funding and the stimulus. And internet service providers are way over there when it comes to the power, because they spend a lot of money on campaign donations and lobbying, and they're very powerful. And they own stuff, right? They own a lot of infrastructure, and they already have a huge customer base. So we're going to talk now about some of the challenges to putting something into place, and what are some of the assets that we have. Well, one of the challenges is political support, which I've mentioned a couple of times now. One of the barriers is the big telecom. They make a lot of campaign donations, and they spend an awful lot on lobbying. This is just campaign donations alone between 2013 and 2019 to some of our big elected officials locally, some of whom aren't here anymore, but that just gives you the snapshot. Another one is cost. So the city school district did its own study back in 2016. It was a really fascinating study and a really interesting model. They determined that a Wi-Fi network that would blanket the city would cost about $20 million, and fiber to the home could cost as much as $80 million. And that's a really big lift. They wanted to use the city's fiber ring and the city school district's fiber ring. So they had mapped out this whole plan to do this. They were not able to get any state funding. The governor had announced a $500 million broadband initiative. It was mostly for rural areas. The city school district was encouraged to apply for the funding, but their application never went anywhere. And I don't know if this is in another place in my presentation. I don't think it is. But I told you earlier about how Spectrum has this $14.99 a month plan. And the city school district went to Lifeline, and Lifeline said, look, if they can get the price down to $9.99 a month, we'll just pay for it. And the city school district said, great, and we'll sign up all the students. So Spectrum literally has to do nothing. Spectrum said no. And the city didn't really push the issue with the franchise agreement. So that was a really lost opportunity to partner with Lifeline. When we talk about costs, those were some big numbers, and those numbers give some people a heart attack. But let's look at some other infrastructure projects in our region. There was a stage proposed for Parcel 5 before the pandemic that would have been more than $20 million. There was a proposal to spend more than $30 million to build new police buildings. We spent $79 million on the airport. We spent $100 million on Route 390. The Tesla factory in Buffalo was $750 million. And of course, the RCSD modernization plan, $1 billion. So when you start to put those numbers into context about what it would take to connect every single person to affordable, low-cost internet, all of a sudden it doesn't seem like the biggest lift on the planet. The other big challenge, one that we're all going to face soon, is planning. Okay, what are we trying to accomplish? What are our competencies and resources? Like, what do we know as a government? Who are our experts? And how much money do we have? Well, we have to design the network. Where do we want this network to be? What's the technology that we want to use? Hey, what's the demand anyway? Who's going to tap into this network? How many subscriptions are we going to have? And what's it going to take to operate it? And then every single time you want to expand this network, you have to go through and ask all these questions again. And now the big piece is you need public support. You need stakeholder collaboration. Okay, who are the stakeholders? Well, first of all, who's your target population? I know one thing that comes up often, and this is something that other cities that have done municipal broadband have experienced. They hear from residents who say, I don't need the internet. I really need rent money. So stop trying to give me the internet. I have other needs. I need food. I need childcare, and you're trying to make me get a computer. No, thank you. And so that's when you don't talk to people about what their needs are and why they need something, and get them on board, you could really run into big problems. You can force this kind of stuff on people. You also need to have flexibility. You can't go in saying, this is what we want to do. We want to cover the Beechwood neighborhood with a Wi-Fi network. If you go in saying that, your project is probably going to fail. You really need to follow the steps of planning and stakeholder mapping. And if you don't do that, and you're just really tied to this one solution because maybe you had a grant for it, the project might not work. It might not work. And you also have to have realistic expectations and communicate that to the public. Yeah, we're going to do this big municipal network and it's going to cost $100 million, but we really want you to know that, we might still have a high rate of poverty next year. You really have to communicate that the internet's not the be all and end all, but here's what it will do, and be very realistic. And you also have to deliver on promises. If you say you're going to do something like we're going to form a broadband task force, you better deliver a project. You better deliver a plan, or else people start to lose faith and they get very cynical. And that's what we call the fast fairy effect. I think this community is a little allergic to big stuff. And I think that will be a huge, huge barrier if we do propose whatever entity proposes it. I think you're going to have a great deal of cynicism and criticism because we've been burned before by spending a lot of money on something that we were told would be transformative, and it just wasn't. It didn't work. There's also socioeconomic factors. You can't just give people the internet and expect them to use it. Some people just aren't digitally ready. They may not have the skills to navigate the internet. They might not have equipment. And you also have to market it. You can't just flip on a switch and not tell people it's there. I mean, you really have to do the work to make sure that people understand that this asset is here for them to take advantage of. And so when we're going through all of this and our task force, the county broadband task force just formed, we haven't even met yet, but these are all things that we'll really have to do. You really have to create a sense of urgency. You have to build the necessary coalitions, and you really have to have a clear vision. That piece is so important. You have to make sure all the right stakeholders are at the table, which I think we've done. And you also have to tell people, here's where our short-term wins are. Here's what we've done. This is great. Yay, we have a plan. Okay, we have goals now. Now we're going on to the next step. And you also have to make whatever solution that you decide, you have to institutionalize it. You have to make it really part of government, part of our community. So this is what's new. For some reason, my Google Voice is going off right now. I hope you can't hear that. I think it thought I was asking it a question. Okay, so what's new? Since I did this presentation first, what's new is we have a pandemic. The digital divide has been grossly exposed because we've all had to learn remotely, work remotely, meet remotely, do so many things remotely. And it has created a great sense of urgency. Congress also has enabled a $50 a month emergency subsidy that was funded through the stimulus. This is a broadband subsidy available to families. This is an amazing thing, and we're just now hearing about some of the rules that are coming out so that families can apply for this. The money will run out though. It's an emergency subsidy, so it's not going to last forever, but it's an extraordinary benefit, and we have to make sure that people are going to be aware of how to tap that benefit. We also are going to have some federal and state broadband funding, which we're just now beginning to understand. And I know Chris Seltman's on the call, and he'll make sure we understand it when more details are becoming available. And I've mentioned this several times during the call. We have a Monroe County Advisory Task Force that was just formed. Our mission is both rural and urban. We have both Democrats and Republicans, school districts, business, government. We have nonprofits. We have a lot of people around the table here to try to figure out what do we want to do and how are we going to pay for it and why do we want to do it. And so the first thing we're going to do is a study. But we don't want to duplicate what we already know. So we have to be really clear. I think we're looking for shovel-ready projects that we can take advantage of this kind of funding that will become available. And we do feel a sense of urgency to make sure that we're able to take advantage of these opportunities. But as you saw in a few slides ago, I mean, the planning stage is really crucial. And I think that's what our study needs to help us, to help guide us through. But we know there's a great sense of urgency. So that is the end. And thank you so much for listening. And I'm just really excited about the possibilities for the future. But this is not simple. It's not a simple thing to solve. So I think there's will on both sides of the aisle, which is so encouraging. I think we're all really unified in wanting to solve the digital divide. I think there's a tremendous economic development opportunity here as well. But we just have to figure out a lot of the details and make sure that this is a real win for our community. So thank you so much. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Rachel. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm now opening up to the panelists for just first any initial thoughts or questions that you guys have.
Oh my gosh, Rachel, that was a wonderful presentation. You definitely, I think why I'm most appreciative of what you just shared is because you propose solutions, right? And not just here's the problem that we all kind of already know little bits and pieces of. Let me frame the context. For me, what was most alarming or eye-opening was when you provided the context of this is how much it would cost, but let's take a look at what we're already spending on things. And so this is not that this is meaningful and cheaper, to be quite honest. And so if we can pour our money into these things, we can pour our money into this. And I think people need to remember poverty is expensive. And if we continue to compartmentalize where the problem is, we lose sight of the fact that this person's problem will eventually become my problem. And so everybody's problem is important, whether it touches my front door or not. And for me, I think my biggest fear is that we get caught up in the politics and we get caught up in the how much things cost, that we just talk ourselves out of actually addressing the problem. Or we approached it from a space, a lens of equality as opposed to equity, right? And not meeting people where they are. Everybody's needs are different as it pertains to this issue, but there are needs that we need to address. So thank you for providing the facts and also sharing some very feasible, I think, solutions.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention about the RCSD plan that was so amazing was that it would have been free to all households at slower speeds, and it would have been self-sustaining by the households who wanted to tap into faster speeds, and they would pay a charge, and businesses would pay a charge who wanted to tap into it. So it was a really interesting plan, and I was always kind of sad that they weren't able to get that off the ground. But there's something very appealing about making internet free, and just remove the barrier,
Right.
just remove it, and families that want the 500 megabit per second internet speed, they can pay. But a lot of us don't need that. We don't need it, you know.
I actually love the thought of tiered access as one way to look at equity, providing something that everyone can access. But when you were talking, a couple things struck me. One is, in particular, is it's not just access, right? It's the ability to use it. And I think one piece we don't spend a lot of time talking about, like our younger generation is much more savvy with technology. And if they have it at home, they adopt it really rapidly. So that's one type of divide. But another piece is the aging population.
The
You
generation.
know, I have another small business, and I can't tell you the number of phone calls I've had with people unable to access things like community solar programs because the solar developers require that they have an email account. They don't have an email account. They don't want an email account. They don't know how to get an email account. And so I wonder, you know, as we're thinking about how we address the whole community's needs, that we'll need to incorporate some thinking around access and support and learning opportunities, not just a one-off, oh, come to this, webinar or even in-person thing, but some kind of sustained presence where people can get assistance. And then the other piece is the economic development. I know for myself, as our business is growing, it was much cheaper to switch to internet phone, for example, than to keep traditional phone service. We'd also would like to expand at some point, but we really want to be in a neighborhood where we could get green light. So how do we maintain a presence in the city of Rochester and access, high quality, high speed internet, so in order to have that growth? And I'm sure my little company will not be the only one interested in those issues.
Yeah, I put in the chat with the aging population. I think that gap was certainly exposed with the vaccine access. I mean, that was a real, I don't know why it was a shock to us, but making appointments available primarily online where they were snapped up quickly by people who with quick reflexes versus making other people who didn't have computers call on the phone, which was a much more time intensive process, and the appointments are all gone by the time they called. In those early days, it was very, very difficult. And it really did show that many seniors, they don't have the internet and they might not be interested in getting it either. And so that's why you can't just flip a switch and give people internet and say, hey, you have the internet now. It's not going to work. And that's also another reason why you have to talk to people in the community and find out, do you want this? If we gave this to you, would you use it? Are you interested? And if they say no, then maybe you either have to figure out other ways to reach them and convince them, or it's not the right project.
Well, can I just piggyback on that? Because I wrote that down where you said, I don't need internet, I need rent. And my first thought was, well, then we need to do a better job at demonstrating how one benefits the other. And that's, yeah, right. And so that, there's a relationship there that, if you have access to education, or if you have access to, even just looking online for jobs that, you can get to them easier, then, there's just that I'm not wording it well, but there's that relationship there that you just need to point it out and show it and demonstrate it. And I know personally, just as a college professor, my students would be raising their hands automatically. And there was a day that 3 out of 4 students graduating from the Rochester City School District went to Monroe Community College. So, there's all of that right there to tap into. I just know my students would be raising their hands.
And I was just going to jump in and say, if people knew that there's a lot of jobs that require this level of technology and access. There is a whole movement of remote work that has surfaced over the last couple of years, right? I know we're all annoyed by the telemarketers, but that's a source of employment for somebody. And had you had, right, the device, the technology, the broadband, that's a source of employment when everything else was shutting down. And so I think that we need to ask folks really, like, what are the needs and what do you have at your disposal? Because if you have a tablet, you should probably have some Wi-Fi. If you have a smart TV, you own this smart TV, but you can't tap into all the functions if you don't have access to the internet. So we're also utilizing and spending money on things and we're not using them to their full capacity. And so I would challenge everybody, again, this is coming from the minimalist who didn't have any Wi-Fi in her own home, challenge folks to take a look at what you do have. I have 3 devices in front of me right now. And so when it's time to sign up for a vaccine appointment, I can be trying on 2 of my phones and my laptop, right? So that's how people are also getting appointments. So you need the broadband with the devices as well, or at least teach people how to fully use what they have at their disposal.
Yeah.
I got a question privately about what's in the federal stimulus bill. And I know we have Senator Schumer's representative on here. Do you want to take that question, Chris, or do you
Yeah,
want?
sure.
Okay, great.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I'm Chris Zeltman. I run Senator Chuck Schumer's local office here in the Rochester Finger Lakes area. And just briefly thank Legislator Barnhart for all your good work on this. And Susan, thanks for hosting and everyone. So briefly, we've had several stimulus bills. The first largest, going back to the CARES Act, about this time last year, last April. And the most recent is the American Rescue Plan, which just passed on March 12th, or got signed into law on the 12th. So within the American Rescue Plan, Senator Schumer, is a big staunch advocate of making sure we had local aid and state aid, direct aid for municipalities who were really, on the front lines with dealing with COVID response. And so we have secured $145 million that will be going to Monroe County. City of Rochester should be receiving about $206 million in aid. Now that's, Congress's intent is to make that very flexible to be used for a lot of things. We've had lost sales tax revenue, we've had housing issues, we've had a whole host of things. So, that sounds like a substantial amount of money, but there's been a substantial amount of need. That funding can be used through December of 2023. So we have some couple of years that funding be available. But one of the activities that Congress and Senator Schumer supported to specifically say that funding can be used for is for infrastructure. And we specifically named broadband infrastructure, as well as water and sewer and other things like that. So all your efforts tonight are really terrific in kind of getting the ball together about where the needs are now that there will be some resources that could be devoted to it. So that's one pot of money, and probably the most direct that our local governments will be able to tap. There's a couple of other pots of money. The Federal Communications Commission will be bringing online about $7 billion nationally directed specifically for schools and libraries. We have a program that's been in existence a long time. It's called the E-rate program, which provides subsidies to schools and libraries for technology. A lot of our schools and libraries in our community receive E-rate funding. So this is additional money that they can use for hotspots, for Wi-Fi, for other activities. And there's also, I know Rachel talked about the $50 credit as well that can go to families. And there are some other efforts that we're doing as well, policy-wise. There's an effort to do a better mapping job so that we can identify exactly, the federal map was always, if a census tract had a certain threshold of maybe on paper we could get satellite Wi-Fi, then the map showed, oh, everyone's set, everyone's got great internet in that census tract. But we need to do a much better job because we know that's not the case. So there's funding for that to help identify kind of where those areas are too. So that's it in a nutshell. But look forward to keep everyone kind of apprised of how these pieces come together here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just we also have, I don't know why if I'm echoing here. We also have Lori from Greenlight on the call, and I know the $50 a month. I think Greenlight will be making that available to some families, and I don't know, Lori, if you want to address that or some of the other things that we talked about.
Sure. Thank you so much. And yeah, we're really excited to be part of the EBB program. This is a game changer. It's a temporary Band-Aid, but it really has the potential to really be impactful in our communities. So what's going to happen is that people that are already eligible, and that's any households that are receiving free or reduced lunches, SNAP, if they've been a recipient of a Pell Grant, had a certain percentage of income loss in the past year, anybody that qualifies for Lifeline, they're all automatically eligible for this. So it's really important to get this messaging out. If somebody shared that link for the EBB information on the FCC website, if you scroll down to like halfway down the page, there's a form, and it's an emergency broadband outreach partner. And I really suggest, put in your email address and you'll be kept up to date on the consumer side of things. They're still creating all of the systems that this will work through. But from what I understand, it's going to be available to both new and existing customers. It's $50 per month per household. And there's also an up to $100 credit for a device. In those cases, families would be required to kick in between, I think it's $10 or $50. So, but I think those details are still being kind of worked out. We've put in our application with FCC, so we're just waiting for the approval on that to become part of the program. We'll use the national verifier system that Lifeline uses. And if somebody's not enrolled, we'll be able to help them figure out how they do enroll. What I've been stressing and talking to people is that, and like Legislator Barnhart said, this is a limited pot of money. It's $3.2 billion. And this program will run either until that fund dries up or 6 months after Health and Human Services, declares the end of the pandemic. It'll sunset automatically. I can't imagine that this fund isn't going to dry up. So it's really important that we make sure that we have a system in place that we can let communities know so that they can be that early bird that takes advantage of this. Somebody somewhere in this country, people are going to be taking advantage of it. Why not have it here in Rochester? One of the figures that surprised me was that out of all of the designated funds for Lifeline, only 20% are used each year. So when we talk about what you mentioned with adoption and just awareness, it's definitely a huge factor.
Lori, I have a question. This was passed a while ago. The funding for this emergency broadband benefit was passed a while ago, but it has taken the FCC a little bit of time to put in place the regulations that would allow families to access it. And what I'm hearing from you is we're still not quite there.
Right. But, in comparison to other orders that have come down and then the funding and the support for the program, it's actually moved pretty quickly. They, with all the rules and Chris could speak better to this, but, the timing, and they have, 60 days from this point that they have to implement this. So, the applications for providers started, I think it was March 9th. It was March 9th till March 22nd. So they're still getting in all the providers. They want providers to participate in this. And anybody that already has a program targeting low income customers, anybody that qualifies for Lifeline, anybody that already has those programs is automatically eligible to participate as a provider in this. The minimum for participating is, I think they did kick up the broadband speed so that you have to offer at least 100 megabits per second to be part of this program, which is a huge improvement from the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund that was only at 25. We're going to just offer the 500. Our base package is $50, so we're just going to offer that. But at least whatever anybody gets through this program will be at least 100.
Got it.
Hi. Okay. So I think it is time for us to move into a few questions that have been in the chat. I want to make sure we address all of them. The first question that I see was from Tina. She was asking, what is the county plan for the $143 million? Has it been announced, and does it include broadband?
Sure. So we haven't made an announcement about how we're going to spend these funds. We just learned about them. I know the Republican caucus has issued their priorities for the funds, and broadband was one of them. So we do anticipate being able to use some of this funding for broadband projects if needed. We're certainly hoping for federal and state funding as well. And we had a meeting with the state comptroller today. A Republican legislator and I had a meeting to find out a little bit more about what the state opportunities might be. So we're really excited about the opportunities. And I gotta tell you, I'm really excited about the bipartisanship on this issue. And I hope we can maintain it, because it just seems like the moment is now, and the window is open and the door is open for collaboration. I think everyone realizes that broadband is something that we should all have.
Well, yeah, and to add to that, Rachel, I know, we've spent a lot of time looking at disparity in the city of Rochester compared to, other parts of the county, but a lot of our more rural areas of our own county don't have much choice when it comes to broadband, or they have maybe only the very expensive Frontier option, right? So we need to address that, not just in our urban settings.
Yeah, and there's of course suburban poverty as well. So we know that in fact the Republican legislator who met with me today has a trailer park in his district where he says there's a really high needs population there, and he just really thinks that there's got to be ways to make sure that they're connected. I feel that people are starting to speak up during the pandemic, and they're calling their legislators and they're calling their representatives and they're saying this is a problem. And so suddenly we're really seeing a push from all sides to say, hey, how can we solve this problem? So the movement is here, and I think we have a great opportunity, and I'm just really hopeful that we don't blow it. We've got a lot of work to do and a lot of collaboration, and I think that we will get something done sooner rather than later.
Jyla, do you have more questions that you want to point us to?
Yeah, sorry, the chat was getting just a little bit overwhelming. All right, so the next question was from Susan Morgan, and she was asking if there is anything we can do right now to make sure the generational gap does not negatively affect the vaccine rollout more than it already has.
I mean, I don't have the answer, but I think we need to pay attention to the data. The same way we were able to say these are the zip codes that have the lowest rates of vaccination, and then open up centers just for those zip codes. I think we're gonna have to do that. I also know in other states, they're starting to bring the vaccine into some of the harder to reach populations, and so getting rid of that step to try to find an appointment, right? Like they're reserving, you know what I mean? Some of these vaccines for that population that is not able to access. So whether it's the homeless or our older folks in the community, we know they're there. We know where they are. So we have to get past that, hey, you have to sign up to access this thing. That's, again, feeding into the disparities. So we have to find them, try to alleviate some of those steps to have to register, or go in and register them with them, right? Like sit with folks, get them registered, set up their appointment, and then be sure that they get to their appointment.
Thank you, Kyvaughn. There was a follow-up question from Susan. What would the environmental impact of something like municipal broadband be?
What would the financial impact of municipal broadband be? Oh goodness.
What would the environmental?
Oh, the environmental impact. Yes, I saw that question. There's no question it would be subject to an environmental review process if there was a significant build out. And I imagine that something of this magnitude there's no question it would be subjected to an environmental review.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bigger concern is less the cables for the broadband than it is all the devices that we are acquiring, myself included, right? And whether or not we put in place programs that require buybacks from the manufacturers. Like, it's a much broader problem than we really have time to get into now. But e-waste is huge, and it's largely impacting, the other countries besides our own, where we're shipping most of this waste. And so that's a thoughtful question, but I think it's less to do with the broadband itself and more of our devices. I want to be respectful of people's time. I know it's 8 o'clock, and Zeltman already signed off, so I couldn't thank him for being here. Want to note, thank you, Town Board Member Robin Wilt, for joining the conversation this evening as well. So I don't know, Jyla, if you have any closing remarks you want to wrap up with?
Oh, Jyla, you're muted. We did have one more question from Ken, if we have a little bit of time just to address that quickly. Jyla, do you want to read out that question?
Yeah, the question from Ken. Yeah, his question was, how do we make sure that the taxpayer money for infrastructure does not go to private companies? We should be investing our money in ourselves.
I can quickly take that one. I agree that there is risk in public-private partnerships. And as I said earlier, I think it's just super, super important that those kinds of contracts really protect taxpayers, protect the public interest, and make sure that we're getting what we want, and also make sure that they're transparent. I mean, that's the other issue with public-private partnerships. So I'm really I really think that that's going to be a challenge, but I also think that a public-private partnership is probably the way that we're going to go forward if time is of the essence. But who knows? Like I said earlier, we can't go in with a solution already in mind. Sue, this
Thank
was
you.
really great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so since it is 8 p.m., I think it's best we wrap things up. This has been a wonderful conversation. At the very least, I know I've learned a lot. Thank you everyone for attending. I know it's a busy time for a lot of people, so it's great that we're still able to gather over Zoom and discuss a matter that is relevant and impacts a lot of people. I want to especially thank our panelists, Rachel, Kyvaughn, and Susan, for adding to the conversation. I want to as well as give special thanks to Rachel for taking the time to create her presentation and share it with us. We hope that you all vote for Sue Hughes-Smith in the June primary and in the general election for Rachel and Sue. Thank you to everyone, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your week.
Thanks so much for your leadership, Rachel. Have a good
Have a
night.
great night, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Okay.
Great job, Jyla.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
very nice work. Very nice work. I'm trying to find the button for stopping my recording.
The recording.
There we go.